Ever pick up a bottle of whiskey and wonder where it came from? That's the area of independent bottlers, and it's one of the more interesting, but also one of the more confusing areas of the whiskey world. So, independent bottlers buy barrels of whiskey from distilleries and then bottle them under their own label. So, for some, that's an opportunity to share something unique, a cask that may not have normally made it under that distillery's lineup. But for others, well, it's a little bit more mysterious. Today, we're going to break down how independent bottling works and make a comparison between what happens in Scotland versus the US. And I'll talk about why I think transparency matters. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a better sense of what to look for when you're hunting for these hidden gems. So let's start in Scotland. When you pick up a bottle of independently bottled Scotch, like this incredible whiskey sponge, you're going to get a tremendous amount of information on the label. So now, Whiskey Sponge is the company that bottled this whiskey. But if you look on the label, it says single malt Scotch whiskey, and it also says distilled at the Ben Nevis Distillery. And that's important. So you know exactly where this whiskey came from. Whiskey Sponge bottles from many different distilleries. And when you pick up the bottle, you'll always know exactly where the whiskey inside came from. But there's even more information right on the front of the label. It's 27-year-old, and it's really good too. 27 years old, 301 bottles, matured in a refill butt and finished in a second fill sherry butt. So you get a little bit more information there about age and how it was actually prepared. That to me is good transparency. You know where it came from, you know what the age is, there's no surprises, and there's no mystery. Now, in the US, things are sometimes different. Now, if you pick up a bottle from a known distillery, like this Larceny, you know, it comes from Heaven Hill, and there's perfect transparency on this label. This happens to be a private barrel. You have the barrel number, you have the warehouse, you have the floor, you have the age and the proof. So you know exactly where this comes from. No problem. Same thing with this Old Forester. This delicious Old Forester single barrel is right on the label, distilled and bottled by Old Forester Distilling Company at Louisville, Kentucky. And again, you have a warehouse and you have a floor. Again, not a problem. But what about this bottle? So this is a delicious, rare character wheated bourbon. So let's take a look at this label and let's look at the difference. So on the front, I do have a barrel number and a bottle number. I have proof. I have the date it was distilled, 9/28/2015, and I have the date that it was bottled, February of 2025. So far, so good. But if you look down at the small print, it says distilled in West Virginia, aged in West Virginia, aged in New Charred Oak, bottled by Rare Character Whiskey Company, Lexington, Kentucky. Now to me, and again, this is delicious, but there's something missing. It doesn't specify the distillery that it came from. Now for some folks who like to do some digging, maybe you can find out the distillery, but to me, on the bottle, it doesn't say where it comes from other than that it comes from West Virginia. Again, it's delicious, but not quite as clear as that Scotch. Here's another rare character, a delicious bottle, by the way. This is a Terry Robards rare character. Now, there is a code on here, VEN 741. So VEN means something. That means that it's distilled in Kentucky, aged in Kentucky. But if you go to Rare Character's website, it gives you some diffuse information. It talks about maybe, it doesn't tell you where it comes from. It talks about a little bit about the warehouse, maybe a little bit of, mystery in there, but it doesn't specifically say where it came from. Now, there may be some reasons. So in the US, there may be some legal implications. Large distilleries, when they sell off barrels to other bottlers, they may not want the public to know where that whiskey came from for a variety of reasons. And you can decide for yourself whether you think they're legitimate or not. There may be legal reasons. If the bottle is, let's say, maybe off profile, doesn't meet the brand, the brand taste, that's something that they may not want the public to know. As far as I'm concerned, in my own opinion, I think that's a mistake. I still think that it would be awfully nice to know where this came from, at what distillery, and get some more information. I do have obviously the proof and the age here, but it's definitely a little bit more mysterious. So, and there's a lot of those. You can pick up a lot of bottles here, and they say something like distilled in Indiana or distilled in wherever, but that's all the information you get. Now, what about this bottle? So this is from an independent bottler in the United States called Lost Lantern. This happens to be a delicious bottle. This is a store pick from Burlington Wines and Spirits called Haunted Hazmat. It's just unbelievable. But having said that, let's take a look at this label. So Lost Lantern is the company that's bottling this. It is it's from their single distillery series, and it comes from the Rich Grain Distilling Company. Now, Rich Grain Distilling Company is no longer open, but you know exactly where this comes from. That's one of the things that I really like about Lost Lantern is I think that they're taking that Scottish model of transparency. And I personally think that's a good thing because you know where it comes from. There's a story behind the Rich Grain Distilling Company that you can look up that I think makes this really fascinating, but there's no mystery here. And that's, again, one of the things that I like about Lost Lantern. If you haven't had anything from Lost Lantern, you should definitely check them out. I will get a commission from them. They don't even know I'm doing this video. I just happen to think that they're a great company, and I love that transparency. Now, before we wrap up, I mean, I get it. Like some of this mystery, it can create an allure. Like here's a bottle behind me. Now, this is a delicious bottle. I love this bottle. I think you should, get it. Again, don't get a commission for it, but this comes from the Augusta Distillery. This is a 10-year, this is a 13-year single barrel, and they're super nice. But if you're at all have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the U.S. whiskey industry, you know that the buzz this year has all been about these buff turkeys, right? That supposedly there's this magical distillate that you either I can't even get it right. It either comes from Buffalo Trace or it comes from wild turkey, and then it's distilled in the other location, and people are going nuts over them. But when you look on these bottles, you don't really get all that information. There are some that supposedly are actually aged in Frankfurt, at Buffalo Trace. There are others that are at 1792 Barton, which is owned by Sazerac, but supposedly not the same. And again, that allure makes people want to go out and get these bottles, or at least try to get the buff turkeys. But, let the buyer beware. You don't always know what you're going to get. So how do you navigate the independent bottling industry in the U.S.? So number one, look for transparency. You're not going to have a problem with a company like Lost Lantern for, say, try to find companies that are upfront and honest about where they're getting their distillate from. Certainly, there's lots of information online, some of it good, some of it misinformation. So make sure you're going to trusted sources to try to get the best information you can about what you're drinking. So like anything else, there's good and bad. Independent bottlers are maybe giving us access to stuff that you can't otherwise have, maybe things that are going to have a unique taste profile that are rare and different and interesting, and I think that's good. Again, but as far as I'm concerned, I think it would be great if we could get more transparency about what's in the bottle for a lot of reasons. Number one, do you want to spend $500 on that buff turkey? Is it really buff turkey? I mean, the list goes on and on. So do your homework, but always be aware that there are those companies that are trying to create that cloud of allure and mystery, which may or may not be a good thing. Again, you judge for yourself. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.